Very good. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Unity Hour. We're so excited to have you all here and to welcome our guest, Katelin Holloway. For those of you who we have not met, we realize we have not introduced ourselves properly in Unity Hour. My name's Colleen Curtis. I head up community at the Mom Project. Katie Mack is my colleague and technical guru who gets us all live streamed and handles many other community initiatives at the Mom Project. And this week, we're super excited to welcome Katelin. If you're in any way, shape, or form on LinkedIn or have been part of HR, you know Katelin. So Katlin's like what I would deem an HR people influencer. And I'm going to let her talk more about her work and her background, but we're just super excited to have you here today. We know a lot of people are having a lot of questions about how to navigate this very strange time at work. And so we thought we'd go right to the expert. So welcome, Katelin. We'd love for you to just talk a little bit about who you are and your background.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'd like to welcome all 500 plus of you to my bedroom. This is now where I take my meetings and my calls these days. I live in San Francisco. I have two little ones. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who run rampant during the day like wild animals in my home. So yeah, coming to you live from my bedroom. I am so excited to be here. First of all, congratulations to the Mom Project. You all hit your 4-year anniversary yesterday. Huge accomplishment, so congrats. I've actually started working with the Mom Project back when I was at Reddit, which now feels like eons ago, although I just left that team at the end of last year. Phenomenal network of incredible people. And I'm excited to have this one-way dialogue with so many of you that are on the platform or know about the Mom Project at all. It's such a wonderful community. So I'm really, really excited to be here. I'm supposed to talk about my past, right? That's
Sure. Yes, whatever you think. I think, yeah, just like how you got started in people. Like, is it something that you always were passionate about, or sort of how you found your way into being a people leader?
Totally. It was a giant accident. This was not a plan. I don't think that many people wake up and say, you know what I really want to do? I'm really into compliance. I would love to go into HR. That's not really, at least for me, and bully to those who found that passion early in their career. But no, I've actually I have only done people and culture for the last decade, which as the time ticks on, sounds a lot longer than it used to. But yeah, I really feel like I found my calling later in my career. Prior to getting into tech and the people and culture space, I worked for Pixar Animation Studios, and I was there for a number of years. Shout out to any of my Pixar people watching right now. But really, I think that that's where I kind of cut my teeth and started to develop my own personal philosophies around the way a healthy culture should operate. And so when I ultimately left Pixar and went into tech, I really took on a role that was more operational. I was doing everything. It was a young company. I think I was employed 21. And I really just kind of took over everything that wasn't engineering or design. And as the company grew and I started to give away my hats, I woke up one day and was like, huh, oh shit, I'm an HR lady. Okay. So it definitely wasn't, I wish that it was carefully crafted and orchestrated, but it was not. But what I feel very fortunate that I got into this space at the time that I did. It was really the very beginning of this revolution of taking HR kind of out of the back office, being very compliance focused and really making it people first. So transitioning it not just out of the back office, but into the executive room and into the boardroom to really affect change. So being taken on as a strategic partner first and foremost, and then really the ability to build things the way that I thought that they should be built. So having been a customer of HR for my entire career prior to that, I thought that there were a lot of things that could have been done better. I always felt like it was a like company first perspective. And the answer seemed to always be no. And I didn't really understand that. And so uh, for better or worse, I didn't have a playbook coming into this role, or I like to say I wasn't classically trained, although I am very fluent in compliance these days. But that came second. It started with being people first, being employee first, and being culture first. And I really, like I said, I took a lot of my basic foundational principles from the experience that I had at Pixar. So yeah.
That's awesome. And you recently joined Initialized as a partner. Is that right?
I did. So yes, in the world's perfect timing here, I decided to have another crisis. I'm not going to call it a midlife yet because I plan on living a lot longer than this. But yes, I did just recently decide to swim upstream a little bit. Once again, I don't know how many people wake up and say like, "Ooh, I want to be a venture capitalist." And to be clear, I have never done investing professionally in my life, but I do believe that. We should be investing in people. And so, that usually what makes a great company, the Mom Project not excluded, is we're really investing in phenomenal people who have high integrity, who are, have high conviction and happen to have a good idea and a great team behind them. So I decided that I care very deeply about supporting underrepresented founders, particularly women, particularly mothers, and I wanted the opportunity to help bring more of those faces to life and put them on the center stage. So I'm thinking,
We're thrilled. We love the move. So we're glad that we get to talk to you more and have you more involved in building our business as well. Okay, so we'll jump into our first question.
all right,
We took questions from the audience already. Katie's also going to field and surface anything that pops up as we're talking. So all of us, employees, we're managers, we're leaders, we're currently faced with this really challenging set of circumstances that's really forcing us to explore how work and flexibility interact with one another. And so as a leader in the people policy and culture space, what do you see as the most pressing workplace flexibility topics that are really being brought to light right now?
I all of them. I feel like in any time of crisis, in true crisis, uh, anything that existed before is amplified, whether it was good or bad or broken or slightly off. And so I think that there are so many things from the workplace perspective that we kind of have been ignoring. We've been shushing away or putting it on pause. Back when I was running a people team, I used to have a folder called #someday. And that's where we would put all the things that were like, gosh, if I wasn't, putting out fires or playing whack-a-mole, someday we'll get to this. This is a good idea. And there are so many of those things now that I'm seeing bubble up as like, oh my gosh, those were actually priorities. And we should have addressed those sooner or earlier. To be more specific, though, I think that the obvious one is remote work, the flexibility to work when and where and how you are able. We were forced overnight into this situation, so there was no graceful dipping our toe in and getting acclimated. I mean, like I said, I'm in my right now. My standing desk is my dresser. This is not the ergo setup that my creature comforts from prior life. But so I think remote work is absolutely a very hot topic because it has impacted so many. And the companies who haven't been able to adjust to remote work are just going to be left by the wayside. There's no room for them. I mean, our freaking education system had to go overnight. Some of these old systems and programs and structures that we have, like in not the tech world, that are on these old rails, like they are doing it. They're trying their damnedest. And so there is no going back from remote or flexible work, in my opinion. I think something else that it's shined a light on is productivity. I think that with the remote work, what we're realizing is that the reality is we actually only have a few hours of work a day. And then the rest is filled in with either social or connection or BS. There's stuff that happens, but it's not critical, right? So our prioritization around what is essential and what we need to get our jobs done has really changed. And so I think that from an internal workplace perspective, a performance management perspective, revisiting how we measure productivity, I think is going to shift and change pretty epically. that kind of parlays into the inclusion and belongingness. All of the extra stuff that isn't work, that stuff still matters. Even though it technically doesn't, fill up your calendar, or you don't mark it in there, that those times where you pass someone in the hall, or you have a laugh with a colleague, or you pop out for a coffee to have a quick, break, those things matter. And so figuring out how to translate those to the virtual world, I think are going to be revisited. And then I mean, I could list so many, but I think the last one that I personally feel very much, and I think is relevant to our audience today, is the parental support and inclusion. Uh, we we're dying. We are dying. Even those of us that seem to be thriving and are like managing, this shit is not sustainable. Like, we are not only, parents and employees during this time, we now also are serving 5 freaking full service meals a day. We are chefs. We are housekeepers. I'm having to clean the amount of shit that is out in my house that I have to constantly pick up and put away. And I live in 800 square feet. Like, I don't have that much stuff. And yet here it is. And then to be an educator, to be a teacher, to be responsible for your children's development and learning. And my God, the emotion, the big feelings we're all having locked up. Very, very high highs, very low lows. And you don't get a pick when someone twerps out when you're on a video call and bonks their head, or, there just is so much. And then the guilt, my God, the guilt of a parent right now. There was that meme or that ism before that, we're expected to show up to work every day as if we don't have a family, and we're expected to raise our family as if we don't have a job. Well, guess what, folks? No work and there is no life. There's not even work-life integration. It just is. We are talk about bring your whole damn self to work. Holy shit. Like, I have now invited, 500 strangers into my bed. I have some family members who have not even seen my bedroom. The intimacy and the level of intimacy involved and needed to be able to manage through our days is very deep. So anyway, that's a tangent, but yes, parental inclusion and support needs to be addressed in a very different way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we clearly are hearing that from the community, and many of the companies we're talking to, is that what once felt like parenting out loud once felt like this sort of rallying cry, like, oh my gosh, I can talk about that I have kids at work. And now they're literally in the meetings, right? Like, in the meetings with us. And so this whole thing shifting so drastically overnight, I think our hope is that not just improving remote work and the productivity and some of these measures by which, the moms have been at the forefront of pushing for those policies, probably 10 years out, and now it's come to a head. And then one of those, when I love that you brought this up, this parental support and inclusion, right? That, like, this does no longer have to be a bias that we're going to tolerate anymore, because we've got CEOs and C-level people home with their kids right now, and so it's become a very up and dear to our heart challenge. Okay, great. So building on this question above, when we talk about learning, how can we ensure that all of us are learning during this current experience, even though it's feeling very stressful? And making changes to the systems and processes that will remain in place and will carry forward once we make our way out of this situation.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting the way you phrase this, learning. How do we make sure we're learning? If this isn't the best crash course in literally everything that we are doing, from our jobs to our education system to the way we operate as a family, within our own 4 walls. I would say this is the highest rate of learning I have experienced, and that I've witnessed other people experience in probably my lifetime. We were all forced. I mean, like very violently thrust into this new ecosystem where we're having to adapt and adjust, and we don't have the pleasure or the luxury of any like micro steps or iterative change that usually comes with a normal learning cycle. I mentioned before, educators. My mom is a third grade teacher, and she was supposed to retire this year. I think that she still will, but I thought she was going to kind of coast in and, do her victory lap and be like, bye kids, to learn an entirely new system. And, she's a tech savvy individual, and I'm using this as an example because I'm watching educators, my mom and her colleagues. These are, very smart, educated people who really are good at their craft. And my goodness, do we now know the power that our teachers deserve? So like, let's give them a raise in this, please. But to watch them and to listen to her, when we chat on the phone, say like, I'm really struggling. My peers and I are trying to figure out how to make this work so that we can support our students. And we have to learn in a week's time. They got spring break to go ahead, figure out how to turn your entire system on its head. And so I use that as an example only because I think that every single industry is feeling that right now. And every single individual is going through their own learning cycle, even on an emotional level of grief. We're truly going through a grieving process as a society, and not just San Francisco or California or the United States. This is a global crisis. Sorry.
It's very real over here at Unity Hour.
Okay. Point being, I think that, for better or worse, that this is one of the highest cycles of learning I've witnessed ever. And so I think that the second part of the question is what ties it together right now. I'm not worried about people not learning. I'm worried about us remembering and how we translate these learnings, as opposed to like, ooh, I'm going to put that in a little box and timestamp it and be like, ooh, that sucked. Remember when? And say, let's remember, open it up and create change, create real meaningful change, whether it's in our workplace policies, which I know snooze fest, but like, these are the things that impact our everyday lives. This is how we as employees get to feel connected to our work and decide where we work. So employers, get ready for some real intense retention issues if you don't shape up. And really, translating it beyond the bunker. This can't be a moment in time. This needs to be something that shifts us and we take advantage. And so, if we glass is half full this thing, and really harness our energy towards translating it outside of our quarantines, I think it can be really powerful.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I'm glad you made that second point, right? Like, it's just like, let's not all forget all of these things. And, it's this cliche thing, right? But we've all seen that drawing of like, your comfort zone, and then you're outside of it, and that's the growth. Like, we all got pushed out of our comfort zone so fast, right? So we are all learning so much. And so what are we willing to rush back to after, right? So after this, and that some of it we don't need to bring back, right? So if there's rigid workplace policies, rigid flexibility, like, what are the things we can effectively usher out and adopt new things based on all of this collective learning that everybody went through? And our hope is that we do see companies coming to do that. And I know the people on the call here are also ready for that. Okay, so not everything has to be doom and gloom. Although much of the news is. So what positives do you see coming out of this experience as it pertains to the future of workplace culture and people policy?
Yeah, I think that, it kind of follows the doom and gloom playbook. Like, if you take this is broken, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken, and you flip it, those are the things that should change. And those are the things that I believe can change. The conversations that I'm seeing around, things like FMLA and supporting people, companies that, had very, very strict or rigid sick policies, opening that aperture. I think that that's really powerful stuff. And I think that we can better formalize that on the back end, because if it works in quarantine, it will work. Like, this is like learning to drive on a Volkswagen bus. If we can do it under the most extreme pressurized, circumstances, they will translate to regular life again. I think that the remote work, every employer that was hesitant to lean into remote work, it was around productivity. Well, how can I track productivity? How do I know that people are going to be doing their jobs? And now that we're all locked up, their concern is actually, mental health and wellness. How do I make sure my people aren't burning out? Because there is no, delineation between personal and work anymore. And so I think that, again, let's keep that feeling, let's keep that sentiment, but formalize it, make people, give people permission to work in the way that they need to work. I mentioned connection and belongingness earlier. Being just really intentional about that, and how can we better formalize those things, because it can still exist in Slack. The parental. It's funny. Initialized only has 18 employees, but many of us are parents, and so our ERG for parents. It's hard to call them that when you're so small, but that Slack channel is alive and well. We're posting and sharing photos of our kids being a-holes and lovely deers and all of the things in between. And so you can still find that connection and belongingness without being physically there. So I think that people are going to realize the importance of that, because when we all go back online, when work starts up again, and we're able to go and breathe some fresh air and take a stroll through the park without having to assault anyone who comes near you, I really do think that we're going to value, I think that we have already started to value just community. And so I think there's going to be some very, very great community initiatives and policy change that come within the workplace that come out of this. I think I mentioned mental health already. So any company that's not addressing mental health on the back end of this, this is, I hate to say it, folks, and sorry, I know this is supposed to be a question about not doom and gloom, but this is a traumatic experience. We are all experiencing collective trauma at the moment, and there's going to be some pretty serious fallout and scar tissue from this. So when it's time to get back to work and get America working again, you're going to be dealing with some serious stuff. I mean, even just children having separation anxiety again, school age kids that you thought you wouldn't have to be worried about, after you got over that hurdle for daycare and then preschool and then kindergarten, and then they're like, deuces, mom. Now they're going to wonder why things have shifted again. So there's a mental load, especially for parents, but for everyone who's going to experience trauma and grief in their own way, whether though the virus has impacted their family directly through illness and heaven forbid death, or just the trauma of having life shifted so dramatically. So I think mental health is imperative on the back end of this thing, and during this thing. And then something a little less heavy, but has been very, very important in the dialogue amongst the HR community, is open source. Open source has, like, watching I know this sounds stupid, and again, this is very like HR talk, but watching the HR community go from, again, like just overnight, like any other job role industry, that rug was yanked out from underneath everyone who was focused on redoing their performance management, or focused on transition, whatever change management thing they were doing, like out the door, gone. And we were asked to write pandemic playbooks overnight. How are you supporting your people? And we're like, the fuck is a pandemic playbook? What do we do? This is not what we were trained for. And the community really rose to the challenge. I've always been a strong supporter and advocate for HR open sourcing, because that is I should describe it actually. HR open sourcing is when you share the BS that is not frontline people work. So whether it's creating an employee handbook, a particular policy, a compensation philosophy or structure, performance management, anything that is like a static framework that that's a deliverable, from, it ranges from compliance to talent development and everything in between. There are some basic processes and basic languages. Some are state specific, some are company specific, but when we the HR community are left to go and create these things overnight, hey, my boss asked me to make our employee handbook, we're 30 people, and it's time to get formal. A lot of these folks in these roles are there because they are great at connecting and supporting people. The policies, the handbooks, the things that take time and energy, those things are important. And they should be developed for your own company, but there's like basic bones in there that can and should be shared. Basic metrics, how we're measuring success within our organizations. And so one of my pals in the space, Lars Schmidt, he runs a podcast, 21st Century HR. He and Ambrosia ages ago started the HR open source movement, and watching it blossom and grow through this pandemic has been absolutely just it has been a bright spot for me, because it finally has pushed us over the like war for talent and the, this is a competitive advantage to keep this policy my own, or the way we think about compensation, just for us. Screw all that. We have to share. We the only way we got through this early phase of like, first of all, what's a pandemic? What's the difference between like, we have a sickness going around, or a virus or a viral spread, and a pandemic? Like, it started there, and this conversation has evolved. And so the amount of sharing that I'm watching in the HR community has just been absolutely not just like heartwarming, but it's allowed us and every employer to best serve our employees. And so that is something I really, really, really hope doesn't go away.
I had never heard of HR open source, so I am going to do some digging, and I'm going to listen to that podcast. That sounds incredible, and what a great movement for innovation in the HR space, and to be that's opened up so much for everyone to learn from. That's incredible. Okay, so acknowledging that we've had such significant layoffs over the past several weeks, even since we wrote up these questions. Originally, when we wanted to invite you to join us, we were getting a lot of questions and inquiries from people who were currently working. And so this question is a bit more geared at people who are currently still embedded at these companies. So for those that are currently employed, how can they best build a bridge with their manager or HR team to advocate for what they need most right now in order to succeed in their role, knowing that the circumstances are pretty difficult? What should we all be thinking about when it comes to building real partnership with our HR teams and counterparts? And I think obviously we're looking at this in a bit of a microcosm right now under distress, but we were getting this question before, right? Like, as we were advocating for flexible work policies, or things that were less urgent in some ways than what we're collectively experiencing right now, but has, like we said earlier, brought this all to a head. So would just love your thoughts about those currently sitting at companies that are employed right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, a lot has changed. And so if you are currently gainfully employed, congratulations. And I just heard this stat yesterday, but you're better off than 40% of your friends. 40% of our industry is now sitting at home without a job. So not just the stress of dealing with like, what is happening, and is my family going to be okay? Are my friends going to be okay? Now you don't have a job to go back to, or a paycheck coming in to pay your rent or your mortgage. So if you are gainfully employed, congratulations. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just been a terrible bloodbath. If you haven't, well, if you have been laid off, or you are experiencing joblessness right now for whatever reason, there are still companies hiring, and I'm happy to chat more about that later. That seems to be a very hot topic right now.
Yes, and we are going to do many more sessions on that for sure. Yes.
Yes. So if you are gainfully employed and you're looking to better partner with your manager or with your HR team, I think that there are a few different things you can do. The first is to acknowledge that this is hard. I mean, I feel like I've talked about that a lot, and I really don't want this to be all darkness. But if you, I think that I want to normalize the fact that if you are currently stressed out and you haven't hit your stride, you haven't hit your new routine, your new normal, as we are calling it, like it's okay, because most people haven't. This is the new normal is not freaking normal. So don't feel or beat yourself up for like, hey, I haven't adjusted to working at home with kids, or I haven't adjusted to working at home alone. Whatever your scenario is, your situation, this is a global crisis. So like, just go easy on yourselves. And then I think that the first thing you should do when you're thinking about these partnerships within the workplace, especially remote partnerships, which again make it more challenging, but not impossible. I would start with a prioritized list. So sit down of your and list out your needs. And I know, especially if you are a parent, that someone's telling you, oh, you should make time for yourself, go easy on yourself. Like, yeah, you're like, I'm ripping my hair out and drinking a bottle of Chardonnay and it's 10 a.m. I get it. I get it. That's okay too. My mom always told me, if it works for you, it works. So don't let anyone tell you that what you are doing is not right. But I highly recommend carving out 5 minutes, whether that's, your time in the shower, and that might be your only time alone. And I feel you. Think through the things that aren't working for you. So if you remember, if it works for you, it works. The inverse is also true. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. So prioritize a list of things that will enable you to be more productive, more healthy, and happier. And they could be little things like, I have a really bad ergo setup. What can I do to solve that? It could be, I can't have staggered meetings throughout the day. Like, even though it technically is only, 3 or 4 hours of meetings, but when they're spread out like this, I really can't get into a flow at home, or I can't do something. Or if it's, everyone wants to do a goddamn Zoom call right now. Some of those can be phone calls. It takes a lot of energy to show up and put your face on and smile and nod and be really engaged. That's great for some meetings where you need FaceTime, but there are other ones where there are maybe colleagues that you work with more frequently that you can just say, hey, would you mind if I just picked up the phone? So point being, go through your list of things that you're like, God, if I could just make this one adjustment, I think it would even moderately improve my mental health and well-being. Make it, trust me, it is worth the time, because turns out a lot of those you can actually self-service. There are some things that you can do, from, whether it's time management and calendar blocks, or simply asking, your team to help adjust. Like, hey, look, I'm going to work the afternoons when it's nap time, or I'm going to go on really early, or whatever the things are that you can do. Finding a dresser to have a standing desk. For ages, I was working actually out of my bed with like pillows stacked, and I started to get a stiff neck, and all of my aging started to come out. And I was like, shit, this isn't working. So, instead of going and shaking an angry fist at HR or my company and be like, I need a stipend for whatever, which might be the thing you need, but think about the things you can service yourself. So if you start with if you are control of you and you are control of your own environment, what are the things that you do have control over? What are the things that you can adjust? Then look at the list of things that you need help on. And I acknowledge that it's hard to ask for help. And it's especially hard when the power dynamic is the way it is. So right now, again, overnight, we have shifted from an employee market to an employer market. So now you should be very grateful that you have a job. And that power dynamic doesn't feel good. It has really harshed our mellow on, the entitlement. And I use that term really loosely because that's not really what it is, but that's kind of how sometimes it's referenced in the battle between HR and employees. But really, the idea that you should just be grateful that you have a job doesn't mean you should suffer. And it certainly doesn't mean you should suffer in silence. And so whittle down your own list, because you actually are in more control of your environment and your experience than I think we give ourselves credit for. 2, figure out the things that you really do need help with. And whether they're really small asks or larger asks, that's okay, but put them in priority order, and then figure out who to talk to. So this is more of a lesson in negotiation than it is a lesson in like tactics, like, oh, what are the right words? It's asking the right person on the right day at the right time, just like anything else. So, if you know that your boss is in a terrible mood because their kid was up all night, or, they just had to do a layoff in another, department, probably not the right time to ask for anything. So I would say start with compassion and empathy, and realize that everyone's having a hard go at this. And then figure out, strategize who the right person to ask is. Some managers are really sensitive to like people going around them. Some HR teams like have a brick wall built to the ceiling. Other ones are very open, and it doesn't really matter. But I think that, if your ask is, say, for example, like, my life would be dramatically better if I had a freestanding keyboard. something that is outside of this. And I tried to order it on Amazon, but it's, 6 weeks out because they're prioritizing essential deliveries. Ask your IT team. Hey, does anyone have one of these? Is there, because they probably have connections to, the larger manufacturers, the wholesalers. So figure out who to ask for what, and then put it again in priority order so that you're not spending all of your social capital in one place. And then as it relates to the things that are very directly your manager or like more systemic and company where you feel like you want to go to HR, or maybe you don't have a great relationship with your manager. Again, like there's a lot in there that we could unpack, but I think that if you can figure out how to have that conversation and open it, I would recommend starting with vulnerability. And again, it's already hard to ask for help, and then to demonstrate any amount of vulnerability is a lot to ask of people right now. But we are all worn so thin that if you show up as that asshole who is demanding and is like, you haven't done this, or I need that, or I can't do my job because of this particular thing that you have done to me, conversation's not going to go very far. So, again, start with some compassion and empathy, recognize that everyone's going through a hard time. And if you open with a bit of vulnerability and saying like, hey, how are you doing? I just want to share a little bit about the experience that I'm having, and share that you've already solved some things for yourself. Everyone loves helping a helper. No one loves helping a taker. So if you show up and you say, I sat down and I thought through this list of things that could make my life just marginally better. And I took care of this, and this, and then I hit a wall here, and just appeal to them as a helper, because that's another thing. People actually really want to help right now. A lot of people are feeling very helped and trapped in that they can't extend any kindness or courtesies because, they're not a frontline worker, they're not an essential worker. And so the ability to help from our homes is actually a really powerful social mechanism that you can employ. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly true. And I just will do a very short plug for our Unity program, which is matching pro bono coaching and resume service to people impacted by COVID-19 job loss or furlough. We were just overwhelmed at the number of coaches that signed up, and then the amount of hours that they dedicated to people was just like, we were blown away. We thought, okay, we'll get like a few coaches and and I think what you're saying is true. People want to help. Mm-hmm. And so if it's helping their employees, their teams, helping their colleagues, their coworkers, that's something we can all participate in that feels progressive and positive, right? Those are just awesome points. And I know something I've seen as well is when we've tried to answer this question in the past, not so much within the pandemic, but this communication above the line and below the line, and really like staying above the line and staying curious and open and having compassion, being vulnerable, as opposed to falling below the line where you feel defensive. And it's interesting because if you evaluate that yourself, oftentimes in a conversation meeting, you can kind of flow back and forth, up and down, depending on it. And if you check yourself and you're like, I need to stay above the line because we're all going to stay above the line here, and that's going to get us all what we want out of this, right? So this is incredible advice. Okay. So with the Mom Project, we love to tell our community that they're their own best advocate. So going back to that advice, and what they push for today can pave the way for the next working parent in line. So on that vein of parental inclusion and workplace flexibility, what if the manager or my HR team is not open to suggestions? And do you have tips that employees can use to effectively prove out the value of a certain process or policy change? And this is a breeding ground for many new things. And so we love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. Unfortunately, this is something that comes up pretty often in the HR community, that the dialogue that we have with one another. And it can be as simple as us kind of bemoaning to one another about, God, they don't understand. And I think that's the us them of HR versus staff is, HR in some cases and most certainly historically, are kind of viewed in this ivory tower as, they are the rule setters and they are the police, and they come in, like I said, they say no. I mean, I've experienced this myself multiple times on the other side. And so understanding the the feeling of, being an employee and being like shaking at the gates and, rubbing my tin cup on the prison cell, like, just, you don't get it, you hate us. Having switched over to the other side, I obviously have a lot more compassion for the why and the how, for, the way in which HR teams address issues within the company. But I think that in healthy organizations, what you see is there's a really open dialogue between the staff and the HR team. They are deeply embedded. This is not a come down from the mountain with your tablets and say, and henceforth, these are the rules, and I'm going to come for you, if anyone breaks one. It really is much more collaborative. And the only way you can do that is by building relationships. Like I said, if you show up on my door or in my inbox or at my desk or in my Zoom room and you're just filled with piss and vinegar, it's a lot harder to have a conversation where I'm feeling empathy for you. Because the reality is, and this is where my having switched over to sitting on the other side of that HR desk, empathy comes from, is typically these teams are super understaffed. I was so lucky at Reddit to have a CEO and a founder that really deeply cared about people and prioritized my function, my team, my department, so that we could have deeper, healthier relationships with the team. But I recognize that that's not the case in most or a lot of companies. And so I think that my recommendations would be, outside of starting to build rapport and personal relationships with the people who, seem to be in charge of the policy making and the rule making, is to start with why, and not in a demanding way of like, why haven't you done this? Or we should have this, like, why do you hate parents? Or whatever the case may be. Because trust me, I've had enough of those people show up on my doorstep with that tone. It's not cute. It's not fun. It's not collaborative. But if you can genuinely, you're talking about above and below the line, if you can genuinely go in and lead with curiosity and say like, hey, I've noticed or I've experienced X. And, in the past, it seems like maybe we aren't as open as a company or a culture to adopting X, Y, or Z. As instead of making it about the individual, like, why don't you do this? But if you come in with a really open, curious way with an observation, I've observed that, our company or our culture has a really hard time adopting, more flexible work policies. And now we kind of are here in the middle of it. I'm curious, like, what's the best way I can partner with you to help you maybe make some of these adjustments moving forward. And so if you show up and you're genuinely curious, if you show up and you are very earnest in your ask, and you offer to help, it will take you so much further, because these teams, like I said, they are under resourced, they are stressed beyond belief. And the reality is, the peek behind the Wizard of Oz curtain is that they actually aren't always the decision makers. I loved it when I got the credit for like, oh, whether it was good or bad. Like, I'm like, oh, you think I have that much influence here? Interesting.
I have a follow-up question to this one that came in from the crowd. You were saying some HR teams are very lean. What if the HR person has been eliminated or there is no HR department? What advice would you give to people who are kind of navigating in that situation?
Absolutely. Because that is the case right now. That is absolutely the case in a lot of companies. And it's unfortunate. It is really unfortunate because in my opinion, and obviously I'm deeply biased here, it is one of the most critical roles. Not only is one of the first roles you should be hiring in your company's life cycle, it's one of the last ones you let go. Because who's going to do the freaking termination paperwork? You're going to pay an employment attorney, like, and manage the emotion. But whatever. I digress. It's interesting because as I was thinking about the question, with an HR team being there, my advice actually kind of stands or is similar enough for both scenarios, which is come with something. Anyone who showed up on my team's doorstep with a proposal of something, if you come with a even half-baked solution, it is so much easier to partner. It is so much easier to lean in and say like, hey, how and why did you get there? So if you don't have an HR team, like I said, hit this HR open source stuff, man. This is good stuff out there. There are some really great communities. And HR folks typically love sharing and being of service. I think that this is a very servant leadership function and field. We love and get our energy from sharing and supporting. And so if you are faced with a situation where you don't have an HR team, and you're concerned about something, or you're concerned about the health and well-being of your colleagues during this time, uh, step it up. Get in there, especially in the absence of someone trying to manage or lead any initiatives during this time. It will be so welcomed. Um, but if you do still have a team, or some of a team left, partnering with them. So showing up and understanding that they aren't the only stakeholder. They aren't the only decision maker. In some less functional organizations, they're just bad cop. They're being told, and they actually have no influence, because really good people leaders, which most of them are, they are employee first. They want to have a happy, healthy, thriving organization. They want people living their best careers, especially under their watch. So no one is out there trying to get anyone or push anyone down. It's either a lack of perspective or a lack of stakeholdership and influence within their organization. So if you show up and just ask, how can we partner on this? And what is the best way in which you would like to partner on things like this? The conversation is dramatically changed.
Yeah, so powerful. I mean, that's it, the dynamic, right? And we had another question that came through as well, of just like, why does this kind of fissure exist between HR and kind of the rest? And I think you've covered that obviously a couple of times through these answers of that's been built up over time, but it can also be broken down over time, right? Like there's this openness, and I think that's really an empowering position to be in. Okay, so for those, we're going to switch a little bit into, we've got a lot of folks in the community who are currently managing and leading, whether it's in an HR capacity or not, who are managing and leading a team through this. And it's become very stressful for them as well. So for those that are working in that sort of leadership capacity or in an HR capacity within their companies, what do you think are the most effective ways they can advocate for the needs of their people and their teams and roll out meaningful solutions relatively quickly, right? So not mired in bureaucracy and,
Right.
hey, 2024, we're going to get that work from home policy put in place. How can they do it quickly? And so what creative advice or strategies do you have for them?
Totally. One, know your audience. So if you are building for someone who historically has not been very open to these things, whether they're a CEO or a founder or a COO, whatever you report it up into the chain, understand what you're working with, and then tailor your approach based on their their kind of default reaction is, and find someone who's done it. That's your most immediate first step. So I've talked a lot about HR open sourcing, but find those communities. There's so many phenomenal people communities out there. I subscribe to most of them, even though I'm not even technically in the field anymore. I just find them.
Maybe we'll get your like top 5 and we'll send it out for everyone so they can have that. We'll do that.
Definitely. So yeah, dial into those communities, because people are sharing, and they're sharing like fever pitch. Like it is happening nonstop. So whether it's a flexible remote work policy, post pandemic, whether it's extended paid sick time or family leave time, whatever those things may be, find the person who has done it and done it recently and done it really well, and then ask. Like I said, there's so many resources out there available. I honestly, over the last decade in this field, I would not be where I am without the sharing and support of the HR community at large. I would still be probably sitting at my very first HR desk, still writing that first employee handbook. That's how much the power of the share is. The second is hit them with the data. I think that, in companies where HR is kind of put still on the back burner, or, they are an under-resourced team, or not really viewed as strategic, and P.S. The pandemic shook out that shit really fast. So if you thought maybe you were, or your boss said it a lot, and then now suddenly you've been brushed aside, now you know. Now you know. But hit them with the data. So operate as if you were not in a second class function. Your job is to advocate and advocate for and represent the employee. So find the executive or find the leader within the company who has your boss's ear or has the CEO's ear, and model their behavior. So when I was first trying to sort out how to do this, and I was really struggling with at the time, I was struggling with not my own leadership team, but I was struggling with our board. I couldn't get our board to listen to any of these things or understand why we were making such a heavy investment. This was ages ago. And so I learned how to speak product. I knew that they listen to the product folks. And so I actually took a product dashboard, their metrics. I took it and I flipped it and I turned it into all of my data. So you can't change what you don't measure, is how that goes. And so find the data. And guess what? HR folks have had to create so much data to prove their cases over time that it now exists. You do not spend an ounce or a minute trying to create it yourself. On my LinkedIn page, I have an ancient old OKR dashboard, a metric. It's a slide, and I started in the appendix back in the day, and I worked my way straight into the boardroom with that dashboard, because finally I was speaking in a language that the board could understand. And so when they saw the change over time, board meeting to board meeting, they suddenly had questions. Why has attrition gone up? Wait a minute, what's regrettable attrition? What does that mean? What are your recruiting numbers? Why have those changed so much? What happened to your top of funnel? Now we're talking. And now that I have you in my little room, I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. And so their attention. So speak in the language that they speak. Oftentimes it's metrics, oftentimes it's numbers, and it almost always, most certainly, has a $sign at the bottom. So the great thing about really, really robust HR policies and practices is that they can be filled with love, and they can be filled with passion, and they can be filled with all of these emotions that we have been told to push out and keep away, because you can do it on any different level of expenditure. So I always say, I give you the tuna, I give you the sushi, and I give you the caviar options. Pick one. I'll have fun in a dirt lot. I don't give a shit. I'll make it happen. Or I can blow it out, right? And so understanding that money talks, and figure out how to create the right plan, and show them the $sign. And because so many people in this profession have had to already go down this path and prove to their bosses that these programs or initiatives are worthwhile, steal their language. They will share it, but take it. And then make it easy for them to say yes. So for as much as you're trying to partner with your HR team and you feel like you're hitting a brick wall, it's so much easier for leaders to redline than it is for them to take an esoteric idea when you come in and you pound your little angry silver pitchfork and you're like, we should have this. Come in and say, hey, I think this is a great idea. I've hit my community. I've hit my network. Here's a basic straw man of what I think it could look like. I'm happy to partner with fill in the blank to make this come to life, whether it's finance or whatever the case may be. Here's how much it's going to cost you. And here's a few different alts, right? This is my recommendation, but this is how we can get there. So just make it easy. If they can rubber stamp something that someone else has been deeply thoughtful about, even if it really only took you a little bit of time because you partnered with your external community, they will do it. But if they look at you and they see that you have $signs in your eyes and you're asking for their time, hard pass.
So right. Data, money, emotions all together make the great policies, right? Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions. We're about 5 minutes out. So we have a question on culture, and then we'll wrap up with a question about job seekers. And then we might just need to have Katelin back every week because everyone's wanting you to have a podcast now. Building from the above, and this was originally made for how can managers and HR leaders support culture, but I think we should make it a question about how everyone can do that. So building from the above, how can we all ensure that a company's culture is still felt while teams work remotely? Is now the right time to evolve culture?
Yes. So the answer is abso-fucking-lutely. Yes, 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 yes. Now is the time. So the reason I say that, and the reason I say it with such excitement, is because since I have transitioned from being an operator within an organization to being on the investing side, I great time to do a massive career shift, but I'm so grateful that I did, because now I'm not just working with one company, with one founder, or with one leader, with one HR team. I get to support the 300 companies under the Initialized portfolio. Um, and every single company is on their own journey through this pandemic, right? Every single company is experiencing different things, from the like, oh my gosh, things are not looking good, to the, oh my God, we have to blitz scale overnight. Like, business is booming because we happen to be in one of those weird things that seems to be very, very important right now. So I do get the full spread of experiences that companies are having. And it's so funny because I get connected, and it's typically is because there's a question around compliance or a question around recruiting. That typically is my in, when someone's like, oh, let me introduce you to Katelin. And then I get on the phone, I start talking and doing my thing, and I'm just so relatable. And they're like, actually, what do you think? And the answer is always culture. It always, always comes back to culture, because the reality is that I've said it once, I've said it a gazillion times. Your company culture, it can be as superficial as, ping pong tables and happy hours and bullshit values, on a poster on the wall. But the real shit, the deep, deep, deep culture work, that is when your company can gracefully manage the worst of times, right? The economists are using words like depression. We are staring down the neck of a very unknown. We don't know when we're going to be allowed out of our homes. Like, if this isn't the most dire of straits right now, I don't know what is. And so everyone is their automatic instincts, especially business leaders, is to look to and turn to the numbers, the metrics. How are we going to stay alive? How are we going to stay alive? Well, I'll tell you how you're going to stay alive. It's your goddamn team. These are the people that are going to make sure those numbers continue to tick and continue to move. It's not about how do you get, how do we work on customer retention? It's not about, launching a new product. It's not about a pivot. It's not about all of those things that maybe are the result of, you needing to have the right board deck. But it really comes from, do you have a strong mission and vision? This is how your people show up to work every day. You are asking them to take time away from their family, from the things that, the pot that's boiling over on the stove, because we all now are cooking potatoes and eating every carb under the earth. Like, we are asking so much of our teams. So much is being asked of us to show up, that you better damn well straight, I think, that I'm working on something that is going to make a difference in this world. So if your mission and your vision statement, and it's not a wordsmith activity, it is a heart activity. I need to know that when I say, hey kids, mama's going to go lock herself in the room for 4 hours to not play with you and not engage with you, it's because I think that I'm making a difference in the world. Whether it is the smallest thing, we have one company, Jinx, they make dog food. I had a 2-hour session with them yesterday talking about how their product helps enable the feeling of community if you are locked in a room with only your pet. So, like, you have to feel that, like, with the fiber of your being. And so when I talk about culture, it's the deep culture work of value set alignment. Right now, every company that thought they had good values, that didn't actually stand behind them, that had no conviction, they are not making it out of this thing, because their employees now know that. So yes, do the deep.
I'm going to freeze frame that one as a GIF. And thank you. That was awesome. Okay. We have like 1 minute left. I would love for you, any last thoughts or words of wisdom for the folks that are listening today, kind of a rallying cry, like what's sort of your TLDR?
TLDR, we're going to be fine. I mean, I think not only are we going to be fine, we're going to be better. There's all of these sayings around, things that are forged in the fire, or, diamonds are made under immense pressure. This is it. Our generation has not been tested. There are very few people alive who have experienced anything on this level. And even then, the Spanish flu, our grandmothers and our great grandmothers, they were 5. They, just like your kids, it was a blip on their memory. Like it's not our kids that are going to be, taken out or damaged by this experience. This is our responsibility to make the world a better place as a result of our experience in quarantine, and living through whatever destruction this curse is going to deliver to us. But the reality is it's how we show up, and it's okay if that means sitting on the floor of your shower and having it out by yourself, full tears. Been there. That's okay. But know that we're going to get through this. We're going to get through it well and gracefully, and we're going to learn a lot about ourselves and our families and what is most important to us. And I think that's a pretty good gift.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Katelin. This was just an incredible hour, and we're so grateful for you bringing all of it and showing up for us. And to the folks that are listening, we see you out there. We are doing everything we can to try to bring the support and service that you guys need and want. And so we are always documenting all the topics that come through in the chat, and we'll be back here next week. So you'll see that from us. But thank you so much, Katelin, and stay well and take care.
Thank you so much. Enjoy, everyone. Go get those quarantine meals on.
That carb line was relatable content. I have never cooked so many loaves of anything. I've increased my baking 100-fold. I never baked before quarantine. So
we're all pioneer women now.
I know, right? Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.